to the Boropolis podcast. As always, I'm joined with Nathan, and finally, we have a win to talk about.
Unbelievable. I can't believe it that it's taken this long, but it's it's an indescribable feeling to be talking about a win after almost 6 months, really. But yeah, we are back. Finally, a league win. But yeah, this one is going to be a really, really busy podcast, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, we've got an awful lot amount to talk about, but I mean, what's beautiful about this episode in particular is the fact that the mood following Tuesday night's game completely is in a different stratosphere to what it is now. And although people may say it's only one game, it's a poor Southampton side that we've beaten. Um, that's what football's all about, unfortunately. And I, myself and Nathan have just been talking about how many points we are off the playoffs already. So, I mean, I think that probably goes to show where our moods are at following yesterday's result. But also, Nathan, we have another reason to be excited and have smiles on our faces. A few podcasts ago, if you've listened throughout the season, you may have remembered us pleading with listeners and watchers of the podcast to nominate us for the Football Content Awards. And somehow, Nathan, we've been informed, and it will be out in the open now, that we've been nominated as finalists. Somehow that's happened. We're both still in shock a little bit, but thanks to the many votes from Middlesbrough fans, we are going to be going to an awards ceremony on behalf of Boropolis at Anfield in a few months, Nathan. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than that, does it?
No, it doesn't. Obviously, we just do this as a little bit of fun for us both. Um, Also running the Twitter page, but speaking about Middlesbrough just as a little bit of fun, and to be sort of recognised for that by Borough fans and possibly other fans that listen to the podcast, it's great. It really is. And yeah, I'm sure me and you will have a really good night in Liverpool in November. But yeah, incredible to be nominated. So thank you for everyone that did vote for us in the voting to be nominated for the final. If you could vote for us for the final, that would be absolutely incredible as well.
Yeah, obviously, as Nathan says, in this process, I think we're both just happy enough to have actually reached the final. But now the voting will reopen from midday on Monday once it has been announced. The voting reopens, and that is to crown a winner. And of course, in the category that we are in, the best club content creator for Football League clubs. We aren't sure at the moment, at the time of recording, which other media accounts or podcasts might be within that group, but we know obviously the category we've been nominated for. So yes, we ask again, we'd love it if you could vote for us. Hopefully we can bring something back to Teesside. The next bit of silverware after that Carling Cup all those years ago, I'm sure we'll try and ask the football club if we can stick the trophy in the trophy cabinet if we win. I'm not saying that we're going to, by the way, but it would be pretty spectacular if we did somehow manage to pull that off. But yes, same applies as the nomination process, rather, I should say. You can tweet your vote. You can put it in the Instagram comments of the Football Content Awards. I'm sure they'll put posts out as and when they've announced the nominees. And also, you will be able to vote via a link, which, of course, as I say, will be released at midday tomorrow. And that link will most likely be in the description of whatever podcast platform you choose to listen to us on, or if you're watching on YouTube, the link will also be in the YouTube description. So yes, all of that will be in this. I can't even talk, Nathan. I'm getting ahead of myself, to be honest. Yes, all of that will be in the description, and also, as usual, if you follow us on Twitter, all of the instructions on how to vote and more details will most likely probably be then once this episode has been uploaded. So yes, that is very, very exciting. Again, thank you ever so much for even getting us to this stage. If you would like to vote us to win, then by all means do. It would be hugely, hugely appreciated from the pair of us. So Nathan will obviously go back to all the positive stuff a little bit later on in the podcast. But of course, we do have to rewind a little bit and go back to Tuesday night. Sheffield Wednesday, live on Sky at Middlesbrough. And the mood was in a very different place following full time after that game to where it is now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, as you mentioned there, Chris, it was on Sky on Tuesday night, 23rd against 24th, dubbed by Championship fans as El Crapico, and it lived up to expectation, really, in terms of the quality on show in the game. It was two sides that you could see were very low on confidence, and yeah, the quality of the game was really poor, really. Middlesbrough in that first half were as bad as I've seen them all season. Some players in particular had really, really poor games that is just not up to Championship scratch. And yeah, we really struggled in that first half, didn't create anything of note, really. Can remember Silvera blazing a shot over the bar towards the end of the first half. But apart from that, not a lot created. Sheffield Wednesday the same, didn't create anything apart from their goal, which came from Sheffield Wednesday's centre half stepping up with the ball, driving forward. Lucas Engel, who was really poor all through the first half, didn't know whether to stick or twist with his man. Ended up doing neither, just stood there like a statue. And yeah, Wednesday get the ball, cut it back from that right hand side, and Musaba, who came on literally 5 minutes before in that first half because of an injury to Josh Windass, is there to easily just sweep the ball home. And yeah, I can't lie, it did put me into a state of worry that we were going to go there and not even get a draw. But yeah, changes were made at half time. Carrick withdrew Engel, who, as mentioned, was really, really poor in that first half, and made a little tactical tweak. Rav Vandenberg going to left back. Isaiah Jones was Engel's replacement, came in at right back, and it sort of changed the game in Middlesbrough's favour. We kept a lot of the ball, and yeah, it's unfortunate for us that we didn't take our chances in that second half to go on and win the game. But yeah, we were lucky to get back into the game with a goal that summed the game up, really. The cross comes in the corner from Lewis O'Brien, and a little scuffle in the box. Defenders and attackers holding each other's shirts, and it sort of just deflects off Lenahan's leg and goes in off the bar. And yeah, it was a really poor goal, but it's one of them that you just take at that point, because we've been struggling to score goals all season, and a little bit of luck has finally fallen in our favour. Another bonus was that we didn't concede a 30-yard rocket from Barry Bannon, I suppose, like we have done most weeks to Championship sides. But one stat that I'd like to bring up that has continued on to this weekend as well, I'm not getting ahead of myself, but I just throw this stat out there.
Yeah.
Based on Tuesday night, was that in every game so far this season, including both cup games, Middlesbrough go down 1-0 in every game so far this season, which it's not acceptable, really, to be 2 months into the season and go down in every single game. Yeah, it's not good. Starting slow. It's been a theme that has continued from the back end of last season as well. It feels like we've been talking about it for a long while, and it looks like it's continuing on, even to yesterday as well. But yeah, that was something that I think should be talked about, that Middlesbrough need to stop starting slow.
Yeah, obviously it's a real obvious, but it's a concerning start, as you say. When we're performing the way that we have done, even again up until yesterday, of course, we managed to spin the result on its head, but it's only making life more difficult for this Middlesbrough team when we're struggling to score goals in any case. You're giving yourselves a mountain to climb every single game, and there's so many times throughout the season that you're going to be able to turn the game on its head before the team that are 1-0 up at that stage basically get a better chance and potentially put themselves 2-0 up. And then, 9 times out of 10, that means that it's game over in our case. So, yeah, thankfully that wasn't the case yesterday. But as you say, a real concern and trend throughout this season. And even, I think it stretches on even towards, as you say, the back end of last season. But yeah, the game as a whole, it was, I've got to be honest, probably one of the worst Championship football matches I've watched in my time on this planet. Two really, really poor sides on show. As we joked about, I'm sure Sky were delighted that they managed to pick that game out of all of the EFL games in the midweek. But yeah, as we went 1-0 down, there was that real concern building that you mentioned, that actually, if we don't come away with anything from this game, where does that leave us really? And yes, we should have won the game. Yes, we'll look back probably and think it was a game that, one of the teams in the league where, okay, fortunes can change, but at the moment, you'd pretty much put them as certs to go down. And we weren't able to capitalise on, at the moment, the worst team in the division. And as you say, it was fairly fortuitous, the Lenihan equaliser. Of course, we did have other chances, and the changes at half-time really, really did benefit us. But I think, probably more so than the performance, the talking points, again, following Tuesday night's game, went back to recruitment. Obviously, the sort of standout for all the wrong reasons, Lucas Engel, Borough's second biggest signing during the summer, just looked completely lost, to be honest. And Carrick did the right thing. It was only going to get worse for Middlesbrough and Engel had he stayed on the pitch. And I honestly, we don't typically sort of like, as a podcast, really going into people for individual performances. But for as long as I've been watching Middlesbrough, I think that could be right up there in terms of the worst individual performance. He just allowed Valentine, I think the Sheffield Wednesday fullback is, to just continuously run by him, and he couldn't stop the cross, he couldn't foul him, he didn't know what to do. And of course, that was where the goal comes from. Obviously, it wasn't Valentine that crosses the ball in, but down that right channel of Sheffield Wednesdays, that's where the goal comes from. And a cutback again. Okay, yes, it wasn't sort of so similar to the goals that we spoke about last week that we've conceded throughout the season. But again, it's a cutback, and that gap between the midfield and defence is glaringly obvious because the Sheffield Wednesday player in this instance is able to just sweep the ball home. As you said, obviously on the topic of recruitment, another performance that really sort of come under some heavy criticism was Sammy Silvera, another one of the summer additions. Quite surprisingly, I think for a lot of people, he stayed on the pitch for, I think it was 89 minutes or something like that in the end. And Riley McGree had been brought off slightly, not even slightly, quite a bit earlier than that. There was a lot of sort of anger around that decision. And yes, we don't want to sort of focus on Sheffield Wednesday, the performance and the results sort of as a whole, but more the talking points in regards to the bigger picture. And I do think it's now becoming quite clear. And even given yesterday, of course, we'll get onto that in terms of the starting lineup and the talking points from that in regards to summer recruitment. But it is becoming quite clear that although part of the blame, and I don't think it's a small percentage of the blame either, is down to Michael Carrick and some of the questionable decisions he's made throughout the season. But the sort of overriding reason for me and a lot of other fans as to why we've started so poorly is it comes down to the quality in the squad, really. And I'm not going to go into the whole goal scoring debate about we haven't replaced Akpom and Archer and all the rest of that. But as a whole, at the moment, and I know it's very risky to do so, you could probably only really say that 3, potentially 4 of the summer recruits have looked even up to scratch in terms of what we needed in this division. And that is a real concern. And until January, we can't change that group. We're going to have to go with what we've got. And I know we got the positive result yesterday, but it still is a real cause for concern. And thankfully we got that point because, the criticisms for individuals and the recruitment team could have got even worse, really, had we have not come away from Hillsborough with at least something.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you've said there, Chris, regarding recruitment. It's simply not been good enough throughout the summer, really. And it's left us in a situation where I understand the model that Middlesbrough are trying to go down of being sustainable, signing players for cheap fees and then trying to develop them and sell them on for bigger fees. That's fine in precedent, but in the last few windows, we've seen players leave the football club in terms of Marcus Tavernier, Jed Spence, Chuba Akpom for ridiculously high fees in comparison to what Middlesbrough have been spending. And we've been replacing these players with gambles, I suppose. A lot of the players that we've signed this summer have been brought in as gambles. And for a club that has pretty much sold numerous amounts of season tickets more than last year, based on the fact that they were successful with a really good side last year. Okay, we signed loan players that performed remarkably well, but you're looking to kick on, and the reason people have bought season tickets is because you're expected to kick on. And look, they've signed a lot of players this summer that were gambles. It's looking at the minute that a lot of those players aren't going to be up to scratch. And I know it's very early. I'm not writing anyone off, but a lot of them haven't hit the ground running. And I think that it leads perfectly on into talking about Saturday's game when you look at the starting 11 and you see that 3 players that were brought in the summer are in the side, and another player that wasn't here last year in Josh Coburn starts up front once again, who was on loan at Bristol Rovers last year. So 8 players in that side were on Middlesbrough's books last year that started yesterday. And that just goes to show at the minute where Michael Carrick's at, that he had to go with tried and trusted yesterday.
Yeah, and that was the point that I was going to bring up that I alluded to earlier. I think, as you say, 8 of yesterday's starting 11, all players that were on our books last season, and that speaks volumes for me. And as I'm sure it does with a lot of other Middlesbrough fans, we are buying into this model by all accounts. But as you say, it's a bit of a difficult sort of topic to negotiate, I guess, because there is still that level of expectation with the prices of season tickets, the amount of season tickets that we've sold. And even though possibly it might not be the right thing, as supporters, because of the way last season went, you kind of hope that the club continues in a certain trajectory and that it's not, one season we nearly get there, the next season's just a write-off. No football fan expects that, and you can't predict the future. But if someone had said at the start of the summer that actually this season's probably going to be a little bit of a bumpy road and we're not really expecting to challenge the playoffs, I think a lot of people would have been very, very annoyed at the way that was going to happen, obviously, given last season. And yes, obviously, I think for me, recruitment is the overriding, let's call it for what it is, the overriding problem and the reason for the way that we've started this season. I know there's been slight tactical tweaks, but overall, I think the tactical tweaks have probably been forced upon Carrick as opposed to the way that Michael Carrick wanted to set his team up. And yesterday, and what's been highlighted again is that we sort of reverted back to type from last season a little bit in regards to the formation and the way that we build up. And even then, yes, it was 8 players from last season's books that are involved in that setup, but also a couple of them are players that couldn't really get a sniff in and around the team last season. So that, again, paints its own picture at where we are with having to play those players that, when we were so successful last season, weren't in and around that team.
Yeah, and of course, you can also see at the squad yesterday, in terms of the bench, Lucas Engel, a signing that was brought in the summer, as you'd expect, first. And well, at first, when he's brought in, he was first choice left back. Of course, Bangura has been injured, but you have Engel there that when Bangura is injured, you expect him to be able to step in and do a job at left back. And he was that poor on Tuesday night that you have Lewis O'Brien filling at left back for you. If that's not a sort of statement from Carrick to the recruitment team and the board above, that, look, you've gave me tools, but the tools simply aren't good enough to play at this level at this moment in time. So he's at a loss, really, with the tools that he's been given. Lewis O'Brien, God bless him, has been brought in to play in midfield for a side that keeps possession, and he's been shoehorned in at left back because we've got 3 left backs at the club. 2 of them are out injured and one of them's not up to scratch. So, look, that tells the whole story regarding recruitment. And of course, you've got Rav Vandenberg at right back. He's not a right back. He's a centre half. But we've got injuries at right back. Of course, it's good to see Tommy Smith in the squad coming back into the frame now. Hopefully, he'll get some minutes on Tuesday night on top of his little cameo at the end of yesterday's performance and get him back up to speed. But yeah, the team, as mentioned, 8 players that were on Middlesbrough's books last season started the game yesterday. Players that couldn't get in the side last year because of the quality that was there last year, and they started for us yesterday. And yeah, it was a really slow start once again, I feel.
Yeah, it was. And I think this is probably now the place to sort of park our concerns following on from Tuesday and focus on the highlights, because we've said there is so many positives, or perhaps not so many, but the positive of 3 points to discuss, and we don't want the podcast to be another tough listen as we spoke about last week. So if you've got to this point, then it's going to get a lot better from this point onwards in terms of mine and Nathan's mood. But yes, we couldn't ignore the concerns from Tuesday and from the start of the season, simply because one result doesn't change that. And although we're now going to probably continue this podcast getting carried away and think about all the positives that might come from that first win of the season, we couldn't basically ignore what was, the overriding feeling going into yesterday's game. But yes, Nathan, it was a slow start. Of course, Southampton took the lead as expected. Adam Armstrong, in this instance, basically manages to worm his way in behind our defence and slot past Seny Dieng. Again, another goal where I don't think Seny Dieng can be blamed. And look, it's not particularly well worked. It's a good ball by Che Adams, of course, but I seem to remember that the goal comes from our mistake to begin with. And yeah, I think what is the main positive in this circumstance, and obviously into the second half as well, is that unlike other games this season when we've gone one down, it did seem to wake us up a little bit.
Yeah, it did. And as you mentioned, Southampton didn't really have to create that chance for themselves. We sort of just gave them the ball on the edge of our own box, and it came from a ball being played into Matt Crooks. He got the ball under control and tries to play it into Johnny Howson. And I don't want to bash Matt Crooks too much, but your number 10 can't play a 3-yard pass to Johnny Howson. Flynn Downs picks it up, plays it into Adams. Adams plays it in behind for Armstrong. And within 2 passes, the ball's in the back of our net. It is really, really, really poor. And if you want to play out from the back, you need the players to do it. We'll go back to recruitment, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, we're not going to get too carried away. We'll move on. And as you mentioned, Borough did grow into the game after the goal. It did spark them into life a little bit. Of course, there was that chance. Isaiah Jones down that right-hand side. Good work from Josh Coburn, actually, to hold off. I think it was Bednarek in this instance.
Yeah, it was.
Holds him off, gets it in behind, plays through Isaiah Jones. And I think he's in 2 minds with this one. He doesn't know whether to shoot across goal or sort of try and lay it into Riley McGree at that back post. In the end, he sort of does neither. It's going wide, and it's just too far ahead of McGree for him to be able to flick it back goalwards. But yeah, a real good chance to get us back into the game. And I think that chance in particular did raise the crowd at the Riverside.
Yeah, it completely spun the game on its head. And I know that since obviously full time and the results come out, and the post-match quotes have been released, that Russell Martin wasn't very complimentary to Middlesbrough in regards to the result. And I thought it was quite funny in the fact that actually, considering the quality that we spoke about, and I'm not denying that they do have quality still in the forward areas of that team, and even in the midfield, there's certain individuals in that defence that should be performing at a much better level. But apart from their goal, I sat back and watched Southampton yesterday and basically just thought how badly they had been coached, because their individuals aren't playing to a level that you would assume that they would. Middlesbrough, yes, there was lots of positives to take from the game, and obviously, especially the results. And look, I think we deserved the 3 points yesterday. We'll get on to the second half performance, which, in the end, it could have been a lot more than the scoreline suggested. But Southampton, my goodness, I mean, in terms of on transition, their defensive shape is I actually don't know what they even tried to do. Obviously, their fullbacks seem to invert, but the amount of times where, as you say, I mean, Josh Coburn isn't the fastest of strikers, but something would break down for Southampton, and Borough would basically find themselves with, sometimes 3-on-1 situations, and you'd just be thinking and looking and thinking, how has that situation developed from Southampton having the ball in an attacking area of the pitch and ended up potentially them conceding? And yeah, I just wanted to highlight that quote. I'm sure you've all read it in regards to Russell Martin basically saying that Borough didn't deserve to win the game in the second half. But not even the second half. I mean, the way he was talking, it was as though Southampton were completely shocked at the fact that piling a load of bodies up into Middlesbrough's half and then just basically forgetting to defend would be something that would work for them. But yeah, Nathan, obviously the real turn in the game was Riley McGree's goal, as you said.
Yeah, it was. And in this instance, it's all on Isaiah Jones winning that ball back. Southampton trying to play out after a long ball from Middlesbrough. Harwood Bellis into Holgate. He thinks he's got more time than he does. Jones does well to press him, nicks it off him. The ball breaks for McGree, who he has options in and around him. Johnny Howson's trying to overlap him. Isaiah Jones is making a run ahead of him. Josh Coburn's making a run ahead of him. And Riley McGree does really well in this instance to ignore all options and cuts inside on that left foot, gets his shot away early in between the legs of a Southampton defender, which possibly puts off Bazunu as well. But yeah, he sneaks that one into the near post. It gets Middlesbrough back into the game at the perfect time as well, just before the break. And yeah, from what I saw in that first half, to particularly towards the end, you could see that Southampton were there to be got at. They're exactly the same as Russell Martin's Swansea side. They can keep the ball as much as they want. But yesterday they failed to pass the ball with much intent, keeping possession for possession's sake, leaving themselves 2v3, 2v4 in some instances, with Harwood Bellis and Bednarek playing at the back. But that's to be expected with the way that they play. And for me, I'd hate to watch that kind of football, really, leaving yourself so open at the back, playing up against Isaiah Jones, who's arguably one of the quickest players in the division, playing against tricky players in and around them. And yeah, look, his comments at the end of the game, Russell Martin's, just rather amusing to me. But look, they came here, they've spent a lot of money to try and get themselves back up into the Premier League, and they've formed, I think me and you were having a conversation in the summer, and I think the word you used was a championship super team. Well, they're going nowhere with him in charge and that style of football, unfortunately for them. But look, as I mentioned, they were there to be got at. And in the second half, I thought if we could give more of the same to what we did in the final 10, 15 minutes of the first half, then it'd be a good opportunity for us to win the game.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about, obviously, my comments earlier on in the summer. And look, this isn't a Southampton podcast, but do you know what yesterday, watching their performance, reminded me of? The early stages of Gary Monk's tenure. Someone, a young English manager that had spent an awful lot of money with a lot of expectation on the team, and basically has that much of an embarrassment of riches that they try and sort of shoehorn players in who are great players but shouldn't be being shoehorned into a team. I mean, Adam Armstrong playing off the right he scored, but apart from the goal, he was anonymous. The midfield balance is just bizarre. And then even some of the substitutions I was just baffled at. it really was quite strange watching them.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to be his Swansea side. I was I was having a conversation yesterday and said that Russell Martin's trying to make Adam Armstrong Joel Pirro, which just
Yeah,
completely isn't going to work with Adam Armstrong's skill set. Um, but look, a club that spent a lot of money in the summer. Joel Perreault was up for sale for Swansea and went to a fellow relegated side. Why didn't you just sign him if you were trying to make someone Joel Perreault? It begs the question. But anyway, less about Southampton because they were incredibly poor yesterday, and in the second half, the sort of momentum in the game stuck with Middlesbrough. In that second half, started the second half relatively slow once again in the first 5 minutes or so, but then quickly grew back into it, and of course got the opportunity to go 2-1 in front with that penalty. Coburn holding the ball up, knocks it out wide to Isaiah Jones. Isaiah Jones plays it in behind for Hackney. Hackney sort of squares the ball across with a sort of cut back for Coburn, and Coburn slightly ahead of the ball. And as he tries to make his movement away from it, Howard Bellis just got hold of his shirt and just pulls him. And I don't know what he's complaining at because it's the most blatant penalty I've ever seen in my life. He's got hold of his shirt. He's pretty much swung him round him.
yeah,
It's definitely a penalty. There's no qualms about that. And yeah, it was a real good opportunity to go into the lead.
yeah. It's interesting, obviously, just before we do talk about the penalty that you said, the momentum did continue in terms of Borough looked a lot more promising than what they had done sort of earlier on in the season. But in regards to, not looking, terrifyingly amazing on the attack, I think it was partially down to Southampton basically just having possession for possession's sake. And that meant that actually, anytime that Borough did pick up the ball, we looked threatening. Perhaps even though the stats maybe wouldn't have showed that when we took the lead, which I mean, really would point towards an argument that perhaps sometimes in football it's better to watch a game than sort of analyze it based on stats. But yeah, that's a whole different argument. But as you say, the opportunity from the penalty spot, again, from me, absolutely no questions whether it was or it wasn't a penalty. I'm not sure what Harwood Bellis is doing. He was fantastic for Burnley, but I wasn't really overly impressed with him yesterday. I felt like Josh Coburn bullied him at times, to be honest. And, we'll get on to the sort of individual performances and individual positives later on in the podcast. But that was a real big takeaway from me yesterday in terms of what Josh Coburn's grown into as a striker. But yes, the penalty. Do you know what, actually? Something that Johnny Howson, who obviously stuck the penalty away, spoke about was when the referee pointed to the spot, I looked on the pitch and thought, well, who actually is our penalty taker? Because Marcus Force has taken one this season and scored one, but of course we knew he wasn't in the squad. Last season's penalty taker, Chuba Akpom, nowhere to be seen. Paddy McNair has taken them previously for Middlesbrough quite a fair few times. Obviously, he was on the bench. And I was a little bit sort of baffled as to who was going to step up and take responsibility. And interestingly, now we know the reason why Johnny Howson did take the responsibility was Grant Ledbetter saying, you're the captain, Johnny, you take responsibility, you go and be the man that sort of does the job for your team. And I mean, there was a little bit of my heart that sort of just skipped a beat once I'd heard that on BBC T's post-match, because Grant sticking penalties away as Borough captain was such a large part of my time following Middlesbrough that, hearing that Johnny Howson had those words of wisdom prior to the game made it almost a little bit extra special. And yeah, a really calm penalty from Johnny Howson. I think he's only taken one previously for Middlesbrough, which was at Old Trafford. and that was pretty emphatic. A different approach to this penalty. He sent Bazunu the wrong way, rolled it into the corner, and then Nathan, what unfolded after the ball had hit the back of the net was, I mean, something that I don't think we'll ever see again. I don't think I ever expected to see. In fact, I definitely didn't expect to see. Something that to me was probably more of a shock than a random global pandemic midway through my 20s just being thrown in there. And of course, I'm referring to Johnny Howson just hitting the griddy in the middle of the other side.
What a random moment of
Yeah.
watching Middlesbrough. I think that's one that you'll see on Borough Memories on Twitter in a few years' time. Johnny Howson doing the griddy after beating Southampton for Middlesbrough's first win of the season in the 2023-24 season. Yeah, as you said there, a calm, composed penalty from Johnny Howson, strokes it into the corner, and yeah, I was so happy that it was Johnny that was stepping up. We're in a moment where you haven't had that first league win. The fans are in a bit of a fragile situation where it could be very close to them being on your back if the result swings back in Southampton's favour. And the man who steps up is your captain, your most experienced player. And in the event of him missing the penalty, he'd probably be the one that I'd say would be most comfortable to shoulder that burden. But yeah, when he was stepping up, I had no sort of doubt at all where the penalty was going, which was the back of the net. And it did make me feel even more confident of us winning the game that we went 2-1 up, because I knew that it'd leave Southampton even more open than they already
Yeah.
were. And it did just do that. As well, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Chris, it could have been 3, 4, 5 in terms of Middlesbrough going forward in that second half and creating chances, because there were so many situations where Southampton defenders were isolated 1-on-1, 2-on-1. And yeah, it could have been more. It wasn't. But yeah, it was good going into the lead for the first time this season, may I add. Dear God, it was a weird situation. And I'd seen someone on Twitter post last night that took a photo of the scoreboard just because it was the first time that we've gone into the lead this season. And it was such a strange sight to see. But yeah, I think everyone is just relieved. And as you can probably sort of hear in my laughter there, relief was the feeling yesterday.
Yeah, it's the major overriding feeling. Even now, it wasn't. Yesterday was not about the performance, although I thought we performed okay. You know, it was a good performance. It wasn't an amazing performance, but it was just about getting those first 3 points of the season. And yeah, relief. I mean, when that full-time whistle went, you'd have thought that we were closing in on some sort of trophy or promotion. You could just sense it round the stadium. And yeah, I mean, look, we don't want to sort of go overboard, because we're still looking at the table and thinking we're still in single digits in regards to points. We still have the same group of players to choose from that have, let's be honest, let us down on numerous occasions so far this season. But I feel like what it will do, just in terms of the squad mentally, is just relieve a bit of the pressure. And sometimes, probably some people almost underestimate that what that can do for players, just in terms of in an instance where you might be in a 3-on-1 situation. I know yesterday, Josh Coburn, bless him, he was fantastic as a lone striker all afternoon. Gets caught in two minds a couple of times. One in particular, I think it was McGree, running to his left. He should have squared it, and he instead opts to shoot. And obviously Bazunu saves it, and we don't manage to extend the lead. But little split-second decisions like that, probably subconsciously for the players, were weighing more on them, because they think, well, the action that I'm about to do is going to have such a big say on if we do get our first 3 points of the season. And now that sort of left them now, although there's still expectations on their shoulders and the pressure that's always going to be in a football match, I think and I hope that it will make that decision-making process a lot easier. And even though it's something subconscious, as I say, I do think it can't be underestimated how big of an impact it might actually have. If you want to play free-flowing football that is good on the eye, but also comes natural to the players, we have got quality in the team, the likes of Riley McGree, the likes of Isaiah Jones when he's on it. The players that would, terrify a lot of teams in the division. Hayden Hackney, we spoke about how brilliant he's been, and there's even been some criticism levelled at him over the past few games. But you just saw, at least I felt anyway, you might have seen something different, Nathan, that when we had taken the lead and what you said, there was almost that switch of confidence that things were just naturally happening quicker. Yet we should again extend the lead when Riley McGree hits the post. Josh Coburn makes the correct decision that time. But it comes more naturally, it becomes more free-flowing. There's less sort of worry behind the players of thinking, if I make this pass and it doesn't go right, I'm going to get a groan from the crowd and it's going to potentially determine us, getting another negative result. And yes, Southampton played a big part in that in terms of how open they were once we'd taken the lead. But also, yeah, as I say, I just think that mental lack of weight on the shoulders of thinking, are we ever going to get this first win of the season? Hopefully, Nathan, is going to be a big factor in us moving forward.
Yeah, you've got to hope that now they've got that first win in the league, that there's a burden that's been lifted off the shoulders. And you could see in the players yesterday, in those final few minutes of the game, some of them were out on the feet. Riley McGree, absolutely out on his feet. There was an instance down the left-hand side where he didn't track Suleimana and he squared it across, and genuinely my heart was in my mouth because I was going to kill him. But he put his all in, but he was stood flat-footed, and I thought, oh my God, if we it'd be typical for us to concede this goal now. And I think the shot was blocked. But Riley McGree put his all in. Isaiah Jones put his all in going forward, was my man of the match yesterday. Absolutely incredible. Isaiah Jones going forward yesterday. He was our outlet many a time. Matt Crooks, whilst he's not necessarily the best suited in that number 10 for us, in my opinion, I think that yesterday you can just see he's a player that is going to put his absolute all in, and he's a player that's not going to last 90 minutes for you, but he'll try his absolute heart out for 60, 70 minutes for you. And he did that yesterday. Josh Coburn holding the ball up, running channels, running in behind. He was brilliant yesterday and looked like a player that is a lot older than his years, really, in terms of his understanding of the game. He was holding the ball up well and knocking it off on one touch really well. You have your defenders, Lewis O'Brien putting in a shift at left back there. Suleimana came on, who is a quick, tricky winger, and O'Brien, who'd played 75 minutes prior to Suleimana coming on, dealt with him incredibly well. Rav Vandenberg at right back, a young player that has been thrown into the firing line, dealt really well with the pace of the game yesterday. And look, yesterday, in those final few minutes, it was a little bit nervy, a little bit. Perhaps that's sort of intensified because we haven't got that win, and you're anxious that this is our opportunity. But the fans in the stadium roared them over the line yesterday, singing Michael Carrick's Red and White Army, getting behind them. And you could see at the full-time whistle, there was relief. I was rewatching the highlights of the game on the EFL show earlier, and you could see at the full-time whistle, McGree makes the clearance and turns and fist pumps up to the crowd as he makes the clearance. And yeah, the effort yesterday was something to behold. But the second half, particularly yesterday, we were very, very good. And that was because we attacked with intent. It wasn't slow, methodical build-up. It was pace, get at players. And I just hope that going into the next games and, well, just the future, really, that we start playing with that intent and pace and trying to get at teams instead of just tippy tapping it and pussyfooting around the box, because it's not really good to watch. Middlesbrough at their best last year was when we break quick, and it's so good to watch. And yesterday, look, we didn't get any goals on the break, but when you attack with pace, with Isaiah Jones down that right-hand side, with Josh Coburn up front, I think that we've got real potential to get at teams and hurt teams. But yeah, the standout for me yesterday was just effort.
Yeah, and it sometimes again goes sort of under the radar a little bit that, you know, not by any stretch are we saying that Middlesbrough players hadn't tried. I don't think that was ever a criticism that we've levelled at this team throughout the poor results. But yesterday, it did feel like there was more of a fearless approach. There was more of a, you know, you're going to have to worry about us instead of us dealing with what you have to offer. And I think that, as you say, Middlesbrough under Michael Carrick at their best when they take the game to the opposition and don't let the opposition dictate what Middlesbrough are doing. And Isaiah Jones was a big part of that yesterday. I think previously, even this season and towards the back end of last season, when he come back into the fold, sometimes he's a little bit guilty of coming on as a substitute and making an impact and then being rewarded with a start the following game and sort of failing to live up to the expectation. And he did that really well yesterday in regards to basically not doing what he's done previously and continuing the momentum that he built up from that man of the match display against Sheffield Wednesday in terms of being on the front foot and being the Isaiah Jones that we know that he can be. And yes, look, I'll say it, I don't want to make it a criticism. Isaiah Jones's end product is, at the best of times, probably could be described as wasteful. But even just having him in the team to get you on the front foot, to gain the team yards sometimes, is such a big positive when previously you've basically watched the team just allow the opposition do what they want to do. And yeah, as you say, that there was that real sort of effort yesterday that we just haven't sort of seen in terms of, maybe effort's not even the right word to use, but just a willingness to not be afraid, I guess, perhaps would maybe be a better way of putting it. And that reflected in the performances. You know, Josh Coburn has come into the team against Sheffield Wednesday. And yes, I think he only had one chance where he sort of bullies one of the Sheffield Wednesday defenders and fires a shot that's deflected wide. But I think having that vocal point really suited us yesterday, and it made us, again, you know, Isaiah Jones, brilliant at getting us up the pitch, but it allowed us, once we were up the pitch, to stay up the pitch. And that was such a big part of it as well yesterday. As you say, Josh Coburn holding off sometimes two defenders at a time and allowing us to build around him was such an underrated aspect of what we managed to do yesterday. And although Latte Lath is a very, very different striker to Josh Coburn, you know, what excites me is potentially those two as a pairing, I think that their attributes could potentially work well alongside each other, where, you know, Josh Coburn is able to hold the ball up and potentially slip in Latte, you know, working off him. I know that's sort of more a traditional front two pairing, but it would be something that would intrigue me. And I'm sure Michael Carrick might have thought about that in terms of using their strengths together. And yeah, Josh Coburn, as you say, his age and the way he performs is really two different sort of subjects in itself, because he performs so ahead of his years in terms of his stature. He plays like a man, if you want to call it that. You know, he doesn't look like the age that he is, and that's a major positive. Yes, he made a bad decision yesterday in terms of not squaring the ball, but as a striker, as someone that we've seen lash balls into the Riverside nets in similar positions to that previously, you know, yes, I was furious at him at the time, but I almost like the fact that he wants to take on that pressure and think, yeah, I'm going to go and score. I'm going to go and win my team the game. And yeah, he probably would have got my man of the match yesterday. Of course, I can see why Isaiah Jones was your man of the match. Lewis O'Brien, you pointed out, and one player that I just want to point out again, you mentioned him briefly, Ralph Vandenberg, 19 years old. I mean, we've spoken about Coburn playing ahead of his years, but Ralph Vandenberg playing in a position which previously he had not done. Against Sheffield Wednesday, he was positioned at left back in the second half, another position that he hasn't played, on his weak side. And I thought he dealt with Sheffield Wednesday's threat superbly well. And even yesterday, up until he was brought off, unfortunately, through an injury, hopefully that's not serious long term. But he's just so composed on the ball, and you can see so many elements of his game where you think, you look back at those reports that so many big European sides were interested in him, and you can see why, because for his age, he's so composed. He doesn't shirk responsibility. He's happy to mix up his game, and although he's good on the ball and he likes to keep it on the deck and keep possession and get involved in that way, he also doesn't mind doing the nitty gritty side of defending and winning a header, putting his head in where it hurts, putting a foot in, just doing the basics, not letting his man get a crossing. And, you know, we spoke quite a lot in this podcast about sort of underrated aspects of performances, and the sort of, yes, last season we think about Middlesbrough playing this beautiful football, but also what's such a huge, you know, underpinning strength of that side last season was doing the basics so well. And I feel like that ultimately is perhaps what got us over the line yesterday. And that was what I was so pleased about yesterday. And I just hope that we can continue that. And yeah, it gives us something to build on. And I think that's what we've been looking for so long in this season, and even stretching back into last season.
Yeah, it does.
And it's just so important that we've got that weight off our shoulders. And as I say, as I've repeated myself throughout this podcast, hopefully the building block and the lack of, not pressure, but just not having that first 3 points of the season now allows the team that played yesterday to go and potentially put a couple of results together and basically just start looking up the table, as opposed to basically looking at League One and thinking, what away games have we got next season?
Yeah. Hopefully they do have that burden lifted, and look ahead to the next 3 league games, I think it is, before the next international break. That's come round bloody quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, by no means going to get carried away. It's our first 3 points of the season, which is bloody amazing to have a first win to talk about on this podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, we need to focus on the next one now, and you've got to build on it and go and get a positive result at Watford. But before that, we have a Carabao Cup game. Now in the nitty gritty rounds, round 3, deep in the competition now, Chris. We've got got through the stages of me and you being fair weather cup fans. I've got my ticket for Bradford on Tuesday night. I'm fully invested now, which will probably mean a poor result, but there we go. But yeah, Bradford City away in the Carabao Cup, round 3 on Tuesday night. A game where you just hope that you can go there away to a side in League Two, despite them putting some good runs together in their division recently in terms of results. The 1-4-1 yesterday away at Newport. So they'll be very high on confidence. They'll be looking to shut up 4,000 Borough fans that are travelling down to West Yorkshire. And look, they'll be looking to sort of make an upset of a cup tie. And we've got to be able to avoid that, play our own game, build on what we've saw on Saturday, although I do expect wholesale changes to the side. And look, we've got to try and go there, win the cup tie, get in the hat for the next round, and look to progress. And if you do that, it's another win under your belt, and it only builds confidence going into the league games. So, yeah, it's a game where I'm not overly fussed on the game, but I want to go there and win and be through to the next round.
Yeah, Nathan, as you say, look, it's a game where it does have the potential to sort of build confidence upon. And I do agree with everything that you've just said. Of course, you'll be in attendance. So, of course, even for you, Nathan, I hope that they can get a positive result. I'm not going to lie, I was sort of questioning your sanity when you told me a few weeks back that you were planning on going. But I mean, now that we've won our game, it makes complete sense that you'd want to go and hopefully see a continuation of what's going to be an unbeaten run from now until the end of the season. But yeah, despite all of that, I would take getting beat on Tuesday to beat Watford on Saturday. And I'm going to make no sort of bones about that. I'm not going to lie about it. Look, I might come into some criticism for saying that, but I'm only sort of reflecting what I said previously. Look, I hope we do win, of course. Never, ever, ever do I want Middlesbrough to lose a game. But you look at Watford and you do think that although they've had a better start than us, it doesn't look like a game where it's a Watford of previous years where you think, God, I'd take a point now. There is that look of the fixture where you think it might not be potentially the worst fixture to go and potentially get another 3 points, dare I say it. I don't want to put the kiss of death on it yet, but look, I would always, that's my personal opinion, I always prioritise the league. I hope we do beat Bradford, and as you say, I think it will be wholesale changes. It'll be a good opportunity to give the likes of Dan Barlaser some needed minutes. Even someone like Emmanuel Latte-Lath, he hasn't come on at all for the past 2 games now, so he'll be sort of chomping at the bit to go and sort of get himself back on track and, get back to the stage of Middlesbrough fans talking about him with optimism rather than sort of disappointment. And yeah, that'll be a good opportunity for some of those players. But Nathan, I guess with more importance, a little bit, without undermining the Carabao Cup, we look ahead to Watford now. As I say, hasn't really been a happy hunting ground for Middlesbrough over the years. And there has been a lot better Watford sides playing at Vicarage Road. But what do you sort of make of the trip to Watford, and what do you hope there? Of course, you'll be hoping for a Middlesbrough victory, but, is this a game where you're going into it looking and thinking, I'd take a point, or do you see it as an opportunity where maybe we could potentially get something more than that?
Oh, look, I think that looking at pretty much every game in the Championship, I look at and think that we can go to away grounds and get things. There's only a few that I'd look at and say, oh well, it's probably a difficult test this afternoon, and I wouldn't expect too much. But look, Watford, they're a side that, as you mentioned, have had a better start than us. I mean, everyone pretty much had a better start than us, so it's not
Right.
really saying too much at the same time. But look, they've got themselves 9 points on the board so far this season, 4 points more than Middlesbrough, and I can only go off watching them yesterday on the EFL show away at Leeds. Of course, Leeds are probably going to be up there as one of the favourites for promotion with the side that they have. But Watford got ran all over at Ellen Road yesterday. And hopefully that's something that will play into Middlesbrough's hands. Hopefully it's damaged their confidence a little bit. They will not be playing on Tuesday night because they were knocked out the Carabao Cup to Stevenage. So, look, they have a bit of rest. They have a free week to be able to get over that defeat yesterday. But as I said, I expect wholesale changes on Tuesday night. So it'll be sort of back to the same Middlesbrough that sort of was involved yesterday. And if they play the same way that they did in that second half yesterday, we can go to Watford and hopefully get a result.
Yeah, just in terms of, personnel, I think the likelihood is, unless there's a quick recovery from potentially Bangura, and even then I'd be, not 100% sure if Carrick would throw him back in. But in terms of changes from yesterday, because I guess you would sort of assume that Carrick, okay, the next game in Bradford, he is most likely going to make changes. But in terms of the continuation of the same side in the league, would you make any changes to the team that won yesterday, or would you be quite happy to see that same 11 take on Watford?
I think that what I'd like to see is someone different,
I
possibly.
guess also in terms of what you think Carrick would do as well, because it's fair enough us saying what we do, but also, with Carrick in mind.
Yeah, I think that I'd possibly like to see someone different in the 10 than Matt Crooks. As I mentioned, he tries his absolute best in there, but at times it is watching him. It is difficult. Like yesterday, giving the ball away for the goal. But what I do think is that if the players that finished the game, that played in the game yesterday, that started the game, if they're all available, I think that he sticks with the same side. I think that it'd be difficult to throw Bangura back in straight away at Watford. Although playing O'Brien there is, well,
it's not ideal, is it? Really?
It's not ideal, and it limits all of his attributes that he has in terms of what he has in midfield. He's limited there, and he's only really being shoehorned in because he's a left-footed player playing at left back. What I could maybe see is if he wanted a little bit more experience in there, a bit more of what was there last year, possibly Tommy Smith in at right back and Rav Vandenberg at left back.
Yeah.
But in terms of the midfield and those ahead of them, I can't see changes really from Michael Carrick's perspective. I think he will stick with Crooks. And I think that in terms of the players, in terms of Jones and McGree off both sides, and Coburn up top, I think they're pretty much undroppable after yesterday. Really.
Yeah. I think I think you're probably right in that instance. And listen, I know that he comes under a lot of criticism, and I also agree that at times it is not as easy on the eye as perhaps a Tuber Akpom in that 10 role. But I can see why Michael Carrick keeps on selecting Matt Crooks, and I know a lot of people would say that that is bizarre. But listen, at the moment, what we need, I mean, even up until yesterday, we just needed somewhat of a goal threat, and we haven't really carried that previously. And look, it would be interesting to see if Michael Carrick would ever experiment with Latilat and Coburn together. And as I said, that's more of a sort of traditional front two as opposed to a 10 and a 9. But, it may be something that Tuesday night might be a good time to maybe experiment with that for, I don't know, the closing stages of the game, just to see the dynamic between the two of them. Because, although Latilat, in terms of his finishing, has been very disappointing, I don't think anyone could question that his movement and his speed definitely causes teams problems. And obviously with Coburn's attributes of holding the ball up and probably being more of a natural finisher in front of goal, that could be quite an exciting prospect. So that would be interesting to see maybe on Tuesday. And yeah, I think Matt Crooks will continue. But as I say, I can kind of see why he's in that role and why Carrick has kept him in there for the last few games. So yeah, Nathan, look, it's going to be another interesting week, and even after the Southampton result and the positivity around that, it only takes another 2 negative performances to flip it back on its head again, and we'll be talking and looking back into League One and thinking which away days we're going to be doing in the third tier of English football. But in the same instance, we could also win 2 games this week, look ahead to the Sunderland and Cardiff games, and be looking in the Premier League thinking, what month are we going to be visiting the Etihad in? So that's the beauty of football, really, and the beauty of supporting Middlesbrough. Let's hope that it is the latter that we'll be doing following next week's games. And maybe, Nathan, after Tuesday's game, we might be eyeing up, hotels for Wembley. You just can't rule it out, to be honest.
No, you definitely can't. I think that you could be booking 2 trips to Wembley in the next couple of weeks. But
yeah, I think that Southampton result really has got the better of you if you make statements like that. Of course, I think that was probably quite tongue-in-cheek. But yeah, Nathan, of course, we have reason, because of the 3 points and because of the nomination, to be a little bit more positive this week. And goodness me, it has been, although even the first part of the podcast seemed quite negative, to be honest, after promising at the start it was going to be more positive. Of course, we couldn't forget about that performance at Hillsborough, even though we can probably forget about it now we've discussed it. But yeah, thankfully the second half of the podcast was more upbeat, and I've definitely enjoyed recording it more than I have done previous podcasts.
Yeah, it has been a little bit of a chore, as much as I like speaking to you, Chris. The last few weeks, having to come on and pretty much have deja vu of every week for the last few weeks, talking about defeat after defeat, and pretty much just anyone that's been listening over the last few weeks has probably felt like they've listened to the same podcast about 5 times. But finally, something different. A Middlesbrough win, the first one in the league this season. A massive win. It's changed the mood of the podcast. It's changed the mood a little bit of the fans on social media. And yeah, we can look ahead to another busy week in the world of Middlesbrough Football Club, where hopefully we come off the back of 2 lovely wins, make it 3 in the space of a week. And yeah, that'll set us up lovely for a podcast next week.
Yeah, it certainly would. And I think that is probably a nice place to leave it on, with the hope of that in our minds, Nathan. Yeah, as we say, it's been a more upbeat one this week, thankfully. I mean, for the sanity of the listeners and viewers more than anything. Yeah, Nathan, obviously that wraps up this episode. Of course, I will repeat what I said earlier on in the podcast. Thank you ever so much for the votes to even get us nominated for the Football Content Awards. But as I say, the details to vote for us again to potentially bring back some silverware to Teesside will be in the description of the YouTube channel, the YouTube video for this podcast, rather, and the podcast provider that you listen on. And yes, of course, I always refer to it as Twitter. It's obviously X now, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about when referring to Twitter. All of the details will be on there and all of our other social media platforms as well. So once that's been announced, please, we're begging you to vote for us. We want to bring back some silverware. But look, we're grateful enough that we've even been nominated. So in all seriousness, a massive thank you from me and Nathan. But yes, Nathan, unless there's anything else that you would want to add to that, I think that is us done, and we will let the viewers and listeners get on with the rest of whatever they are doing.
Yeah, just echoing what I've said there earlier on. Thank you very much, everyone, for voting for us to be nominated for the Football Content Awards. If you could vote for us once again in the final round, then that'd be absolutely brilliant. And yeah, it's much appreciated from both me and Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. A lovely place to end it on. So yes, as Nathan said earlier on, this podcast, hopefully we're recording next weekend after another 2 wins and what will be our 3rd win in as many weeks, to be honest. I mean, it would be quite a remarkable turnaround, but we live in hope as always. But yes, from me and Nathan, thank you ever so much for watching and listening as always. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast.